Never wear metal jewelry while playing tennis, or you might end up in a vegetative state. Adela was in the middle of an intense tennis match with her sister when, unexpectedly, she hit the ball too hard, striking her sister squarely on the forehead. Her sister slipped, and a metal hat pin pierced straight through the back of her head and into her forehead. Fortunately, her sister didn't die, but ended up in a motionless, vegetative state. The doctors warned that the hat pin should never be moved, as it would instantly kill her. Adela felt immense guilt and tried every possible method to heal her sister, but nothing worked. As a journalist who loved adventure and traveled around the world, Adela remembered an ancient remedy, reviving the legendary Dr. Patmos, who served the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. Surely, he could find a way to save her sister. Without hesitation, Adela packed her bags and set off for the pyramids of Egypt. Together with an assistant, she found the entrance to the pharaoh's tomb. But they weren't the only ones searching for treasure. There were also many grave robbers. After piecing together their collected treasure maps, they discovered a key element. Adela quickly spotted the mechanism on the stone door and used sand to balance the scales, successfully opening the pharaoh's tomb. A mysterious black liquid started flowing out from behind the door, but the grave robbers, thinking that opening the door was the hardest part, immediately turned on each other, trying to get ahead. Adela remained calm, pointing to the liquid and saying it was oil. If she threw a match into it, everyone would burn to death right there. The grave robbers didn't believe her, thinking she was bluffing. One of them touched the liquid and lit it, causing an instant fire. The robbers realized that Adela was knowledgeable and that they would have to rely on her to find anything valuable. As expected, Adela led them deeper into the tomb, where they found gold and treasure everywhere. The robbers were dazzled by the gold and immediately pounced on the treasure they had been longing for. Adela, however, was not swayed. Her goal was to save her sister, and finding the pharaoh's mummy was the key. Just as Adela reached the sarcophagus, she heard a grave robber scream in terror. One of the robbers on the left, who had been collecting jewelry, had his neck caught by an iron rope and was strangled to death. It seemed as though the jewelry was resisting the greedy robbers. Another robber on the right, who was diving into a pile of coins, suddenly fell into a trap. Meanwhile, another group arrived, including a local police officer who had a grudge against Adela. Knowing that Adela intended to revive the mummy, he mocked her for her foolish ambition and took the opportunity to sabotage her. The officer ordered Adela's arrest on charges of destroying relics and planned to execute her on the spot. Before the execution, the officer, pretending to be kind, offered to grant Adela a final request. Calmly, Adela asked for a cigarette and even borrowed a lighter from the officer. But this was just a ruse. As soon as she had the lighter, Adela pushed the officer aside, ran out, and set the oil in the tomb on fire. The pharaoh, seemingly anticipating that his body would be discovered by future generations, had filled the tomb with deadly traps. As the flames roared, Adela, who had already researched the mummy, knew that the exit might be beneath the sarcophagus. The traps also suggested that there was more hidden underground. Adela skillfully climbed into the sarcophagus, believing that the safest place was the most dangerous one. Being the tomb's owner, the sarcophagus was indeed safer. With the trap activated, Adela tumbled down into an underground river, floating to safety. She not only successfully retrieved the body of the mummy, but also defeated a gang of grave robbers. Adela placed the mummy in a museum's collection room, ready for the next step, finding an expert capable of reviving the mummy. That expert was Joseph, an eccentric researcher of ancient Egypt. Joseph firmly believed in the existence of souls after death and had dedicated his life to studying this. Using his mental power, Joseph could make objects around him spin and float. Anyone witnessing this would surely think he had superpowers. At that moment, Joseph was focused on hatching a fossilized pterosaur egg, originally from Paris. Under Joseph's mental stimulation, the egg began to show signs of cracking. Soon, a pterosaur that had been dormant for 130 million years broke out of its shell and flew out of the fossilized egg. By normal logic, this would be impossible. But Joseph's Egyptian magic was so extraordinary that it truly brought the dead back to life. However, there was a side effect. Joseph's consciousness and body were now fully linked to the pterosaur. After its revival, the pterosaur was anything but docile, crashing through the roof and flying out of the museum, heading towards the crowded city center. It flew over a police chief who was flirting with a dancer in his car, flipping the car into a river. Furious, the chief ordered his men to capture the pterosaur. The police scoured the city as the revived pterosaur wreaked havoc, destroying buildings and killing people. Joseph finally managed to control the pterosaur with his mind, making it return to the museum. When the police arrived to investigate, Joseph quickly hid the pterosaur and pretended nothing was wrong. But the police, intent on making trouble, insisted on having eggs in the museum. This provoked the pterosaur, which instinctively tried to protect its egg and roared at the police, who were terrified. Caught in the act, Joseph was arrested. Adela, who was seeking an expert to revive the mummy, was devastated when she heard the news. She had no choice but to devise a plan to break Joseph out of jail. Disguised as a lawyer, she managed to visit him, and they finally met. Joseph explained that he had only been practicing with the dinosaur egg, never expecting the Egyptian magic to work so successfully. Since the pterosaur could be revived, so could the mummy. Adela tried to continue the conversation, but unfortunately the police threw her out, and her disguise was exposed. She was expelled from the prison. However, Adela refused to give up. She kept trying to sneak in, disguised as a doctor, nurse, priest, and other roles, but failed each time. The prison had been ordered to be on high alert after the first attempt to prevent any external people from sneaking in. The pterosaur had caused the deaths of 3 people, and the authorities decided to execute Joseph by beheading him in public. The police also hired professional dragon hunters to shoot the pterosaur with sharp arrows and guns. When Adela heard this, she was extremely anxious and used her journalist status to seek a pardon from the president. Just as they were meeting, the pterosaur, under siege, swooped down from the sky. Adela quickly pulled the president down, but this only made things worse. The pterosaur's daylight attack showed just how dangerous it was, confirming that Joseph was a mad scientist who was utterly irresponsible. The president escaped, but his guards, thinking Adela was trying to assassinate him, arrested her as a terrorist and expelled her from the presidential palace. Adela returned home, dejected, and looked at her vegetative sister, feeling completely lost. She had always felt guilty about her actions and had been searching for a solution for years. Luckily, the museum curator, where Adela used to work, discovered that the pterosaur had returned. This gave Adela an idea. Use the pterosaur to rescue Joseph. She cautiously approached the pterosaur, stroking its back and signaling her friendly intentions. Then, taking advantage of the moment, Adela jumped onto its back, and despite the pterosaur's resistance, they flew into the sky together. They crossed the city and arrived at the execution site, where Joseph was tied up, ready to be beheaded in front of the townspeople. Adela descended from the sky, grabbed Joseph's clothes, and rescued him from the execution. The police were furious and ordered everyone to be on guard, but the pterosaur's massive size made ordinary humans powerless. Joseph, barely escaping with his life, was extremely grateful to Adela. There was no time to waste. It was the perfect moment to perform the resurrection ritual. But just as they began, the dragon hunter hired by the police quietly approached, hiding behind cover. Suddenly, a gunshot broke the silence, and the pterosaur was hit. It let out a mournful cry and collapsed. With his life tied to the pterosaur, Joseph spat out a mouthful of blood, clearly seriously injured. Adela quickly took him home, and with his last breath, Joseph performed the ritual. Objects around them began to float in the air, and the clock's hands spun wildly. This time, the ritual was even larger in scale, almost exhausting Joseph's life force. The pterosaur let out one last, tragic laugh before dying, and Joseph gradually lost consciousness. But Adela's sister showed no signs of waking up. Adela thought the ritual had failed and felt utterly defeated. But then, to her surprise, the mummy in the glass case nearby suddenly sneezed and broke out of the glass, coming back to life. Adela watched in astonishment as the mummy, curious, looked around and finally approached her sister. Adela asked the mummy if there was a way to cure her sister. The mummy, with a resigned expression, explained that he was actually a nuclear physics,